The food service, hospitality, and retail industries are evolving in ways you've never heard of until now. Hosted by global industry technovator Rob Grimes and powered by the IFBTA, TechBytes is your go-to podcast, putting technology innovation and trends on the menu.
So welcome to another NRA edition of TechBytes. And there's some people you get to see once a year, twice a year, whatever it might be in here. This becomes an annual event. So I always have these conversations with John Hart, and I've known you for how long?
About 20 years. Close on?
20 years. And John is the national president of the Restaurant and Catering Industry Association of Australia. So I got that.
You got that.
But I'm sure that people have already figured that one out. But actually, that's not the only thing you do, because you and I have worked together on training initiatives and a bunch of different things. So what else are you doing?
So I also chair the organisation that represents all of the wineries and grape producers in Australia. I chair an organisation that manages the training system and all the trainers and our registered training organisations called Tourism Training Australia. And I'm on the board of Food Standards Australia and New Zealand. So
there's a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But if I'm listening closely to what you just said. You're actually involved actively in basically hospitality, food service, and then of course the wine side, fits, across those things, and then training standards. So governmental things as well as operational.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've been doing this for a while, and we've met over there on this. So if we're talking, some of the main initiatives or the main challenges that are facing the industry in Australia, what would they be?
Absolutely workforce. There is no doubt that the number one problem for the restaurant industry in Australia is access to trained people that have the skills they need to do the job. And in an environment where we locally in Australia have a declining population, save immigration. So immigration is the only thing that's keeping us going. And there's not enough people coming in with the skills they need to do the job. So we turn over $67 billion a year in the restaurant industry in Australia. We employ about 1.2 million people. And we've got at the moment about 175,000 vacancies.
So you know all the stats, but actually you're queuing up a few interesting points there that maybe sort of nuances to this whole thing. So I wouldn't have thought about immigration being, maybe is that the solution, or that's where the people are coming from, right? To work in the industry.
That's the only way that population growth is occurring across the board, and the only place where we're getting skilled people.
Well, if that's the case, that actually puts an additional complexity on how you look at the labor in the industry, because people are coming from different cultures.
Yep.
And they have to assimilate, or they bring their cultures there. It's not, usually when we talk about this, we talk about people who are visiting, and you have to be able to deal with an international audience, but an international workforce. What percentage of the workforce is actually non-Australian? Not non-Australian born?
Non-Australian born, we'd be looking at about a third.
About a third. Well, that's big.
Yeah.
So if you were talking about how you're working to meet the challenges of that workforce, what are the key things that come up?
Probably the key thing is access to skills that they need at the point in time at which they need them. So these people are generally coming into those roles.
Skills on demand.
Skills on demand. Absolutely.
Okay, and how do you accomplish that?
It really is about being able to determine what skills they need when, and having platforms that enable them to access those skills right at the point at which they need them.
So in your introduction, you gave out a lot of statistics. Now, I do know a little bit about associations, and a lot of them work with lobbying, and they work with the governmental pieces. So some of the statistics you gave out, are very similar to that. But you're also really, you have your hand on the actual operations themselves in your day-to-day job, and how we first met working with the operators.
Yeah.
So how do you marry those two to, the governmental regulations, the training, the labor pieces, with actually providing, hospitality and teaching that skill set?
Well, the the view that I have across the industry is quite unique. So I'm not only chairing a large operation, which is in the Adelaide Hills in Adelaide. I'm chair of a new venture that's a function venue, a winery operation with cellar doors, as well as a restaurant operation.
I'm sorry, are you telling me you're an operator as well?
As well, yeah.
Okay, is there anything that you're not doing?
So knitting all of that together, being aware at the front line of what those skill shortages mean and the capacity constraint that they bring, and then to be able to, from a regulatory perspective and an association perspective, make sure that there's products that we have available to help the operators on the ground to provide those skills right at the time when they need them. And we've developed through Tourism Training Australia a product that allows us to get an insight into an individual from their search behaviour online, from what they're posting on social media, from job ads they're placing, what their specific needs for individual skills are, and we can serve them up.
Gee, there's no privacy issues there, is there?
Well, no, we de-individualise it, depersonalise it so that we...
You want us to spot the trends and then figure out how that's going to fit.
Exactly right.
So now that I just learned that you're an operator, and I don't know that I ever actually... How many years have you been involved with the association on the restaurant catering side?
25 years.
Did you actually start in the industry in operation? Because I don't know that I've ever actually asked you that question. So what did you start doing?
I started working in hotels. I actually started in the Hilton Hotel in Sydney in 1981 as a busboy, and then went through a trainee manager's program, which took 2 years. Went to hotel school in Switzerland, and then came back.
You were Lausanne?
Indeed.
You did?
I did.
Okay.
And then I came back and ran food and beverage outlets and hotels.
So how do you make a transition from running food and beverage outlets in hotels to going in the association business?
I made the transition through going into the education space and worked in a community college. We call them TAFE colleges. And I headed up food and beverage management in a TAFE college and then segued into the association.
So it's interesting. After all these years, I'm actually learning that. I either wasn't paying attention when you told me the first time or I'm learning that. So our backgrounds are very similar, having started in ops. Well, I never thought I'd be doing an association, but certainly the technology space that's there, which is, what caused us to first meet on the International Hotel Restaurant Association, which was, sort of an eye-opener for how to apply technology to some of the issues that were going on, right? So I'm figuring this thing out now. So you're back in operations, but you started in operations. So just out of curiosity, was it 22 or 27 years?
22 years.
Was there a 22-year gap between operations and operations?
Yes.
So in between that, you're representing the industry and doing it. But when you went back into operations, was there something different that you either did or did not expect would be?
I think I expected it, which was the impact of those skill shortages and labour shortages on the way we do things. And particularly our use of technology, because in that 22-year period, obviously the whole landscape's changed from a technology point of view. But the whole landscape has also changed from productivity at the operations level. We can't do things the same way as we used to do them because we can't afford to. It costs us too much to be able to employ the staff that we used to employ back then. Now we have to solve productivity issues with technology.
So what is your perspective as to where technology, really plays its role in our industry?
And it's really interesting to look at two markets like the United States market and the Australian market. We have a minimum wage of $24 an hour.
Okay.
And we have...
That would be Australian dollars.
That would be Australian dollars.
Okay.
And then we escalate that with all sorts of other penalty rates and the like. Bottom line is our wage structure is incredibly expensive. So an average outlet at the moment will be looking at about a 48% wage cost. Now, the pressure that puts on operations means that you have to be able to do as much as you can using technology, but the absolute focus is on productivity. It's not on security. It's not on having tech that necessarily integrates for the sake of it. It's about what is the impact of those individual pieces of kit on your productivity. How can you recover the cost of that tech by reducing wages, reducing hours, and making that tech work for you?
So without, talking about the translation rate of, Australian dollars versus US, 48%, I understand.
Yeah.
And, that's very high,
Yes.
In a global, standard when you're looking at, food costs, labor costs, margins, in there, that's a very high piece that's attributable to that. So has the Australian market changed to not only where they're finding ways to use labor more effectively, because I hate to say reduce labor because we are a labor intensive, but but also new ways of operating and new outlets and things, new revenue centers, that also enhance revenue, perhaps have a better labor model.
Yeah, exactly right. So every business is looking at diversifying in ways that it is increasing its range of product that will enable their existing staff resource to create more revenue without additional cost, but at the same time changing up the way they do things to make sure they're more efficient. Delivery, for example, is just totally off the charts. We've got our delivery providers, our Uber Eats, our DoorDash.
Was delivery off the charts before COVID, or it's a byproduct of COVID?
It was growing very, very strongly before COVID, but then just went off the charts during COVID.
I sort of remember that drive-through was not always the biggest thing in Australia.
Never.
But I suppose that drive-through, pickup, all those things have taken off as well.
Not to the same extent. Not to the same extent. The home delivery market, because it caught the wave, we're getting a lot of
that home delivery thing comes up a lot. I mean, I've been talking about with a number of people here, even the Food Manufacturers Association are calling themselves, the Away From Home Association.
Yeah.
And you talk to other companies that are using the same thing. I think we're also finding that a lot of food service operators are finding themselves on grocery store shelves.
Yeah.
And that also is, restaurant quality food served at home that you may actually prepare at home, right? And not even have delivered. So that really changes it.
It totally does. And also, in that delivery market, we're looking at quite a different dynamic of delivery in the Australian market because we have a lot more independent operators, not so many fast food or quick service restaurants. So the food that's being delivered to your home is truly restaurant quality food.
And it's full service food, right? Which is a byproduct here in the US, from COVID, because people just couldn't believe that you were going to have luxury foods or higher end foods being able to be delivered, and yet they're still doing it. So, and then packaged and prepared full meal kits. I mean, a lot of imagination there. So, we're here at the National Restaurant Show, and you're coming here every year. So I think 21 years.
Yep.
So you're coming here every year. Do you go to other shows around the world as well?
I have been to a number of shows around the world.
So where do you
Well,
spend
particularly the shows in Asia. I've also been in Europe. But because we're so close to Asia, I've been to a couple of the Asian shows.
Do you go to them on a regular basis?
Not as regular as I come here.
So are there major differences between each of the regions that you see from your perspective?
So yes, everyone totally different. For instance, we did an exchange with the Singapore Restaurant Association a couple of years.
I know those guys, yeah.
They're great guys. A really different dynamic based on the
headed
cost
up by a
structure.
McDonald's guy right now, by the way.
Yeah, amazing. But they've got a great business model, but it's based around totally different parameters to in Australia. So, for example, all of their cost pressures are around rent, because that's their largest cost.
Right.
Whereas ours is the reverse. It's on labour. And then when you come to a market like this, your cost of food, cost of goods is the focus. So it's those nuances of the way different markets approach.
Well, I think I'd like to drill down into some of that, and then, of course, talk about the technology. So let's just, take a moment, and we'll take a break, and then we'll come back. And, I'm having a conversation with, as I have many conversations with John, usually over a beer, by the way, but we don't need to say that, but okay. With John Hart, who is the national president of the Restaurant and Catering Industry Association of Australia. So we'll be right back and we'll continue the conversation.
With the rapid expansion of technology in the food and beverage industries, finding the right supplier can become overwhelming and complicated. To simplify this process, the IFBTA created Exchange. Exchange is a powerful search tool where users can easily narrow down their technology search and refine results by application type, geography served, department, and more. Browse resources and learn more about the industry's technology suppliers at exchange.ifbta.org. Now, back to the show.
So welcome back. So we started the conversation. So John Hart of the Australian Restaurant and Catering Industry Association, but also, I want to say the beer, wine, and spirits, but it wasn't. It was the wine.
Grape and wine.
Grape and wine.
Yeah.
So is it wine made out of grapes?
Wine's made out of grapes. But we represent,
So why do
we represent those that grow the
growers?
grapes and those that make the wine.
So you're representing the manufacturing side as well.
Indeed.
Then we had the training side,
Yep.
and representing on the Council on Tourism and Training, which cuts across everything in there. So let's see. I'm missing something. I'm missing standards, the food standards, right? Right. We had the food standards. And then we learned, after so many years of knowing each other, that he's actually back in operations, started in operations. So there's probably a lot to talk about. So if we take a look at the technologies themselves.
Yep.
So in the Australian market, because you and I compare notes on this.
Yep.
How's the Australian market, if we take the major global chains out of the picture, how does that market compare to the technologies that are available and in use in other markets?
Yeah. I think we're slightly tech forward of a number of the other markets, and probably including the US. And that is because on a number of fronts, we need to really focus in on that productivity angle. So order at the table, order online, check out online, check out at the table are absolutely commonplace now, because the businesses have to be able to get that efficiency in their business. They're not constrained by issues around payment gateways and tips, for example, because that doesn't happen in Australia so much.
Are you very much a cashless society?
Very much a cashless
Okay,
society.
so that is a major difference too. We seem to have a problem getting rid of the cash.
So
side.
from that perspective, the payment and ordering and food delivery end, we would be ahead of most other markets.
But if you're ahead in those markets, then are the technology producers, the suppliers that are creating the applications, are they keeping them within the bounds of Australia, or are they selling them globally, or is that their desire to do that?
There are probably more providers of those sort of technologies in Australia that are trying to get into other markets, but feeling quite a lot of resistance. So perhaps the biggest market that we've got in order and pay at the table, they really struggle in the US market, and they struggle in
Why
other
do you think that
markets
is?
I think it's the tradition, the tipping tradition, the tipping functionality, which isn't big on those apps, and a whole range of service issues.
We have in the U.S. for years, I could think 20, 30 years, there are restaurateurs that go out on a limb and try to say, can we get rid of tips? Can we go to service charges? Can we not? It's a very confusing thing. And then also our regulations on how tips are handled, become very complex. That actually is a major challenge here, in doing that. Okay. So is there a particular nuance of a technology that you see either you wish you had in Australia, or you think the rest of the world should know about that Australia does?
Well, we'll start with the first one first. We simply do not have a staffing solution that works in Australia. And that is because we have a very complex system of workplace relations. So our pay rates, allowances, penalty rates, all of the payroll issues and the necessity to have breaks and a whole range of other things that don't apply as strictly in any other market means that we do not have one product that allows payroll to be integrated with rostering, to be integrated with operations.
Right. Now, I don't want to make a mistake, by the way. So, to be properly correct, when you're talking to me about this, are we talking about New Zealand and Australia together, or just Australia and then New Zealand's a whole different thing?
New Zealand has similar problems, but they're not as over-regulated as Australia.
Over-regulated. Okay. And within Australia, because one of the first things that you and I did many years ago was we created some videos that were done to be used in the, is it provinces? States, right?
States, yeah.
In the states.
Yeah.
How many states are there? Was 16 or 13 or 12 or something?
No, only 7.
Okay, so I got that wrong. So I
Yeah.
obviously wasn't a good student here. So we have 7 states.
Yes.
But it was taken across. Is there a lot of difference between the state regulations?
No, there's not at all.
In the industry. So that's actually a good thing, because
That
they
is a good
struggle
thing.
with that here,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that makes the nuances even worse when you're talking about labor and you're talking about those things that are there. Okay, so we are here, at the show, and they're saying that there's about 700 technology companies here.
Yeah.
Now, by my definition of technology, which includes the cooking equipment and things like that are here, I think there's more like 13 or 1,400 that are here throughout the show, because if you have an oven, it's got a digital thing on it, right? So is there something in particular that you've seen here that just really, you're sort of like, wow, that's going to be the future of something that's coming?
I think some of those products that are focused in on workforce efficiency, productivity, staffing, if we could crack getting past that over-regulation and getting some of those products able to be integrated at the back end, that would solve a lot of our problems. I also think some of the issues around payment gateways, our banks have a stranglehold on the payment gateway in Australia to a much greater extent than they do here and in other markets. To crack that as well, to get better integration from booking through table management, point of sale, settlement of transaction, and then a marketing loop back to the beginning. If we could get that integration, as I see so many products here that are doing that, that would be a game changer.
Well, the interesting thing about that here, and they always have that debate, is whether people would consider all-in-one solutions or whether they go best of breed. And then when you add the complexity of the points of data and the points of information and connectivity that people don't even think of, they don't realize that their fryers are connected.
Yeah.
Okay, they don't even think about it, right? But that is a vulnerability point.
Yeah.
If you're connected in there. And so I had a conversation with somebody yesterday about this, saying that they wish that, restaurant operators, hospitality operators really took a more holistic approach at how they view, connectivity, data security, the threats to them. Is that the same thing that you have?
Absolutely, yes. And I've done quite a bit of work in that Internet of Things space where we're automating all sorts of products and trying to tie that back into our systems. And particularly in the restaurant business, there are so many opportunities to do that. The challenge we've faced is the one solution, the integrated solution, usually comes with a requirement to really put everything of your business into that system. And if you don't include every part of that system's operation, then it starts to fail.
Well, you can't possibly include everything.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when they were doing on-prem based systems, that was certainly a problem. But once you went to the cloud and you're able to connect different data points, but most people will have integrations, and there's nobody who can really do everything, totally well, nor can people afford to, change up, right away. I think the closest thing to that is, the large number of systems that require you perhaps to use their payment gateways.
Yes.
Which was to your point. I don't actually know how that would work in a environment where the banks are sort of control, are the banks in the POS bit, not credit card POS, but in the EPOS business, are the banks in that?
Yes, they are to some extent. And they're starting to develop products further and further down the chain. So they're not doing it as efficiently as some of the providers here, and we've got a really good penetration of Square in Australia at the payment gateway end. They've managed to crack the nut, and now they're building back, obviously, into the POS space. So,
but do the banks become the POS providers?
Yes, they've done.
Or
that
do they do partnerships and they bring it over and they're selling that way?
They do both, but they charge a pretty penny for the integration, like a lot of money. So they create this demand for their products that are already integrated. So, but they really do have a stranglehold on it by regulation in our country.
I'm just sort of thinking the complexity of that. So let's talk about two specific areas that you also are involved in. So you mentioned food safety.
Yes.
So why don't we go ahead and do what was it, Food Safety Council? Food and Beverage Safety Council?
No, Food Standards Australia and New Zealand.
What does that exactly mean? Because the word standards, has different meanings to different people.
So we are a government organisation, a government agency, and I should say that whatever I say is on behalf of that agency. But
we get it.
But as part of that,
how about if we just keep it between us and we won't share it with anybody? So go ahead.
So we set the standards that are prescribed in the food code, and then every one of our states then enforces that food code. So it's from products through to practices, through to premises, the whole gamut of food safety and keeping our food system safe.
Well, there's a training component in that too, right? So that cuts over on the training side.
Indeed.
Right. So are you setting the standards? I always think like the hotel industry, or I think about wine standards, or I think about meat standards, right? Are you also doing those kinds of standards, or it's the safety standards?
No, their safety standards, but they're also standards that prescribe elements of food product and also elements of beverage product. So, for instance, there are parts of the food code that prescribe the alcoholic content of various products, and they also prescribe what is safe to use as food processing aids.
Right, and then we have the handling farm to fork.
Yes.
And are consumers in the marketplace, when they go out to a restaurant, do they want to know where it was sourced all the way through?
Provenance is a very big thing in Australia, and we are much more conscious of where products being sourced from, how many food miles sit behind the product. Those sort of characteristics are, really on.
But it's a connected system that has to be able to do that, right?
Correct.
The technologies have to integrate with each other.
Correct.
To do that.
Yep.
So if we talk about the other piece, then the training side of this. So when we're talking about the training side, I suspect, are we talking about the technology of training, or we're talking about the training and like the standards of certification and things like that?
Standards of certification, and then we put up product through tourism training that basically fills gaps in the market. So if the training system needs products that aren't currently available, we'll produce those products and make them freely available to providers of training so that we can fill that gap.
And so you have a delivery it's sort of like this is a food safety, but like ServSafe here is provided to states, and then they go ahead and provide it. What you're talking about is all types of training, operations, hospitality. How do you deal with the challenges of 6 generations within the workforce today? Maybe 5 generations in the workforce today. The 6th generation, unless you're doing child labor, the 6th generation is a customer. Okay, so how do you deal with that when you're looking at education training, across hospitality and tourism?
It's a real challenge. We have to make sure that we've got products that are targeted to the needs of each of those generations and each of the specific roles that we have, and make sure that we're really getting to the nub of what that individual needs at that point in time. So I'll give you an example. So in the hotel space that we both know well, a functions porter, or somebody that's setting up a function room today, that turns up for work a couple of days ago, walks into the room, gets told they need to set up a theatre style in this room, and they're setting up a banquet style in that room. How do you think they work out what it is that they've got to do for the day? They go on their phone and they Google it. and they work out, what does that style of room setup look like? we need to be able to make sure there are products that are available and recognised and industry endorsed.
Does a person take that certification with them then from employer to employer?
Absolutely right.
Because that's really why the government would want to be behind that, so that they're setting a standard for that, right?
Exactly right. So we enable those to be connected to standards that are portable and able to be connected and transferred from employer to employer.
All right. So just a couple of other questions since we happen to be here having our annual chat. So no technology involved here. I mean, you can pick it if you want. Have you had a chance to walk the whole show?
Yes.
Okay. So is there something that really surprised you? You said, oh, wow, that's really cool. Maybe I got to have it, or, that's just a cool thing that you saw here?
I think some of the kitchen innovations are off the charts. I mean, to see some of the work that's going on automating kitchens, and quality product coming out the other end is always impressive at the show. It never ceases to amaze me, the amount of innovation that sits behind those products, but behind everything else as well, behind packaging, behind product.
And there's really everything here, right?
Yeah, it's truly amazing.
So, when you go home and you talk about one thing, is there one thing that you just going to go home and just talk about and say, you won't believe what I saw? It's like, I want to know because I want to go visit it, right?
Well, the winner of the Kitchen Innovation Award is a product that cooks eggs from scratch and holds them in a product that basically takes out all the labour of cooking eggs. I can't wait to have that in some of our restaurants.
And it gets rid of the shells, right?
And it gets rid of the shells, and you get a great product out the other end. I thought that was incredible.
All right, I'll have to go. Certainly take a look at that as well. So, well, that's great. And so you must have a full schedule when you're here of different activities. So representing Australia and New Zealand in each of the different markets and things, that you're doing, what are the other takeaways that you're going to bring back with you for your constituency?
I think one thing that's very obvious through the transition of the show is that we now, on the food side, we're really into whole foods and not so much into meat replacements and those sort of products that were very prominent at the show previously. We can now see.
There's a whole pavilion on it.
Yeah. So those things are starting to nuance. That's interesting. The packaging side, I think, is really interesting. I'm still on the lookout for a biodegradable package for our takeaway or takeout food. Still can't find one.
The interesting thing about this, sustainability and those types of things and waste seem to be a bigger trend outside the U.S. Than in North America than they are here yet. But there's a lot to learn as we catch up on that.
Yeah.
Especially like Asia's,
Indeed. And a lot of providers here, obviously, Asian markets that are wanting to use their packaging product. Still haven't found quite the right one, but I'll get there.
Okay. Well, listen, on that note, I need to get there and, come back over and collaborate together because there's a lot of opportunity, obviously, that you brought up on technology across the industry and common interest. So I'm going to suggest that our next beer, maybe be, on the rocks or something in Sydney, and
let's do it.
We can do that, or one of the shows there, which I always enjoyed. But so it's great as usual seeing you, here at the National Restaurant Show, our annual thing, but we need to do it more often. And John Hart, who is the national president of the Restaurant and Catering Industry Association, the Food and Beverage Standards, which I know I just said that wrong, and of everything else, the grape and wine industry, and the trading and tourism across the board. That's a lot on your plate, and I guess there's no better plate to serve it up than here at NRA and on TechBytes. So thank you for joining me for the conversation.
Great to catch up.
This podcast is brought to you by the International Food and Beverage Technology Association. The IFBTA is the industry's voice of food service, hospitality, and retail technology, providing thought leadership as your single, impartial, and go-to resource. The IFBTA offers in-person and online communities to connect with your peers, the exchange, an all-encompassing global technology resource, and an industry-wide professional education and certification program. The bottom line is the IFBTA is your place to gather, learn, and share. and share in conversations like the one we're having today. Thank you for joining us on this episode of TechBytes, powered by the IFBTA. I'm Rob Grimes, your host, and I look forward to taking our next bite of technology together.